We know the graph has two elements prior to 2025, the individual thing that we've been talking about for end users, but also the developer, one single API to rule them all. And I will ask Julie just blatantly, does it rule them all, Julie?
It does not. It doesn't even get close to ruling them all. Welcome to the new year, 2026, and our first episode of the year to Ask Sympraxis. Oh boy, I'm starting off on a great foot. Ask Sympraxis. And we're going to talk today
Julie,
about...
back to one.
Back to one. What the bleep is work IQ? All right, gang is all here for the beginning of the year. And as I said, we're going to talk about work IQ and try to demystify it, I would say. So we'll start with, and Mark Cashman's going to put his old hat back on and talk about Microsoft marketing, the then and now, and then what is work IQ, and then I'll do a Sympraxis translation of that, and then Patrick's going to hit a Copilot readiness recap, and then Mark Anderson's going to hit some customizing Copilot for you, which is something we did sort of glean out of the, putting this together is a lot of more detail about customizing Copilot, which is something more newer to the product. So let's jump in. Mark Cashman, take it away.
Into the Wayback Machine. So we all know and love Office Delve. It has come and gone, but it really marked the signal of a lot of what we're talking about today. Back in 2015, our glorious leader at the time, our being when I was a part of Microsoft, because there'll be a couple of those mentions, was Satya, and his way of referencing what we're doing. He actually had Office Graph and Office Delve on stage. And if you read the part that's bolded, this is the new intelligent fabric that backed really the whole of Office 365 at the time, but was really channeled through Office Delve as the first product that was built on top of, at the time, Office Graph. So 2015, Office Delve, Office Graph, the intelligent fabric underneath that really helps you bind who you are, what you're working on, and what other people are doing around you. Cut to 2018, a lot of the stories remain the same, but there was a name change. Office Delve became Microsoft Delve, and of course, Office Graph became Microsoft Graph. Key important thing for developers, they don't say the Microsoft Graph, they just say Microsoft Graph, or if you're like Julie, you just say graph and then you say bleep and then you have lots of expletives. But really,
Yes,
the story remained the same. 3-year gap, not a significant use of the graph from a product perspective, but growth in terms of what it was actually connected to. And sort of inside what I remember was they turned it on actually before they released any product that was on top of it so that it could do what it does. It builds this nice graph that became a graph of your company, and over time became more of a graph of you as an individual, of what you're doing, of which the next slide highlights the visual nature of it. And you'll see from 2018 and between roughly 2020, the way that the graph was marketed in terms of the section we're on. If we can move to slide 5, it really was all about signals. So signals of what email and who you're sending email, who you're meeting with. All of you today would be a wonderful signal of something that's relevant to me and proximate to me based on who you are and then what you work on, all based on permissions and all of that goodness. But again, if you read the fine line in terms of the main messaging, this was the Office Graph at the time, intelligent fabric, really trying to pull in things that are relevant to you, not just keyword searches, but things that are relevant to you based on who you are, who you work with, and what you work on. Cut to then 2025, from around 10 years later. The next slide you'll see, just keep this graphic in your mind, and then on the right, you'll see the first graphic. Not too different, right? It really centers around the individual, what they work on, who they work with. Now it's what agents they interact with or build, and the couple of things that we're going to then talk about in the next couple slides once I hand off to Carrie. But visually, we're talking about the same thing. And that really, before I hand off to Carrie, I think was the impetus of our team thinking, what is this thing? Is it something that we already have, already know about? Is it a component of the graph? We know the graph has two elements prior to 2025, the individual thing that we've been talking about for end users, but also the developer, one single API to rule them all. And I will ask Julie just blatantly, does it rule them all, Julie?
It does not. It doesn't even get close to ruling them all. But what I will say about the graph, and if as far as these signals go, from a developer perspective, you get that RESTful interface for all of those connections. So like when you go and get a user, you can then say, okay, this user's contacts or people or teams or whatever it might be, and there's sort of this idea that you can traverse down through things about how they're connected. So that is absolutely that sort of cloud-like graph of how things are connected is absolutely how you can access the data. What is a problem and what has been a problem from the developer perspective is if you were developing on SharePoint before it went to the cloud or even as it's in the cloud, the problem that we have is that product features get put into each one of these little, sitting on this slide, get put into each one of these, things. Word gets features, Excel gets features, PowerPoint gets features, OneNote gets features, SharePoint gets features, and not all, there's a time lag and or time drop off where there might be an API in those product specific APIs, SharePoint being the primary one of them, where that endpoint or access to that data in a programmatic way doesn't end up in the graph either at all, or the lag is so significant that it becomes really problematic. And in the case of SharePoint, there are so many things that are in the product's REST endpoints that are not in graph that makes a huge disconnect. And what makes, the joke about how I, have expletives around the graph, that's why, because it's so frustrating to have this huge gap between REST endpoints that you can access via the product APIs and the features that you can access via the graph. So that becomes very frustrating. All right, let's move on.
I just have one
last solve that. It must solve that.
It must. And so I did want to just read one verbatim. It's pretty short, from Ryan Roslansky when he was up on the Microsoft Ignite keynote stage 2025. This is how he described the slide that you're looking at. Work IQ is the intelligent layer that enables Copilot and agents to know you, your job, and your company. Work IQ isn't just Copilot's brain. It understands your business, workflows, and relationships. Work IQ connects everything that matters inside your company and turns it into an experience that feels effortless, powerful, personable, and it's made up of three things: data, memory, and inference. Cue next slide.
All right, Carrie.
Further to that,
you want to summarize?
Yeah, and a lot of this too, listening to the keynote and looking at some of the blogs and stuff, it is worded just like that according to Microsoft. So this brain behind Copilot, this intelligence layer that, as Mark said, helps Copilot know you, your job, and your company. I'm trying to sort of get my head around it a bit, like what's different, like what does this sort of really mean? And it's that second bullet, the brain behind Copilot, that feels like it's what should be different, right? It's not just retrieval anymore. It's a bit more reasoning. So how is it framed to do that? Using these three pillars, if you will, that they keep kind of mentioning, this data, memory, and inference, and how does that work? And Julie, I know you're going to explain this a little more in a future slide, thank God, because I was having trouble trying to explain it to myself. But just for context here, the data piece is all of your content, right? Your files, your email, app, and even chat messages. And so this is all that information that you have in Word and PowerPoint, Excel, Outlook, Teams. Well, so it's sort of connecting the dots between all of that stuff, right? So it's not just a prompt that you enter in and have this, file come back. It's sort of connecting all the bits and pieces from your data. Then the memory bit is, and this is kind of where we were talking about this week, is described as how the work happens. This is how I've heard it termed a couple of times. It's just how this work is happening. So over time, apparently, it's understanding your style and your sort of communication style, how you respond, your preferences, who you talk to, those relationships and collaboration habits that you have. And so this is this learned memory that is connecting up with all of that data to then provide this reasoning. And that's been framed as this, looking over at your data and memory, able to provide and recommend more relevant information that's more specific to you. I said, well, I think we'll talk more about what that really is, but that's essentially those three pillars that are making up this work IQ bucket, apparently. The key takeaway that I just kind of kept coming back to and listening to this is that it does feel like it's being framed more as reasoning versus thinking. And so having more context along with all of your data should give you results more of a partner than, say, a chatbot getting a file. So whether that's true, we'll see, but that's sort of what I took away from them.
Yeah, and I think that's a good summary of essentially how Microsoft is framing this. And I think from the Sympraxis point of view, our translation is more that I think what they're trying to do is help define work IQ as a way to help people understand those three pillars underneath and give it some context, but more from a marketing perspective. There's really not much new here that wasn't already talked about in one shape, way, shape, or form before. So essentially, those three pillars, that data is really just the Microsoft Graph, which Mark, talked about a couple slides ago, and I sort of, was saying it's sort of this. From a programming perspective, it's this traversing of the data and how everything is related, because everything is accessible. You've brought together the whole Microsoft 365 data platform in one API interface and tied all of those things together. So you have the data from the Microsoft Graph. You have the memory, which Mark is going to talk about a little bit more. This is This is where the work IQ definition gets really confusing, because memory could be, oh, I know historically what all has been done. Well, of course, I have the context of all emails. And if I go into a RESTful endpoint and I say, give me the 200 last emails, that is, in a way, you could define that as memory. But memory is also how Copilot can know things about you so that it can help give you better answers going forward. And so Mark's going to talk about that. So that's memory is sort of two things. Memory is, well, obviously the data is historical, ergo it's memory, right? And then the last is inference, which is really the semantic index plus the orchestration of Copilot. So let me give that a little more context and say that all the data is in Microsoft Graph, and we know we have access to all of that data. What the special sauce is of Microsoft 365 is that your tenant, once you have purchased one Copilot license, creates a semantic index around your data that is in Microsoft Graph, and it keeps that semantic index constantly updated. It's similar to a search index, but it's a different type of index. And I did, in the references, we did include a link to a Microsoft Learn document that talks about what a semantic index is in a little bit more detail. But essentially, it's taking sort of keywords and making sort of one of those, you remember those word clouds that were so popular? It's kind of that idea, like, how are these things related by the keywords that are in them, and how closely are they related? Because the keywords that I can find in these two separate things are close enough, and it's doing that kind of indexing. That's what the semantic indexing is. And then orchestration is this idea that when you have an interface with Copilot, that's your user experience. And then the LLM part of it, which in this case is ChatGPT-5 right now, although I guess we are going to have the ability to start changing those foundational models, but let's just stick with the normal out of the box kind. In between that user experience and the LLM is the orchestration. And so what we have to remember is that orchestrator is built by Microsoft in a certain way to work a certain way. And you can think about the orchestrator as your logic between what the user asked for and what the LLM can answer. And so if you've not seen it before, there's a slide where it shows that the user will ask a question, that will take that question and try to ground that question by augmenting it with data from the Microsoft Graph that is relevant to the question the user asked, and then take that and package it together with the question and send it off to the LLM for it to conjugate over, which then returns an answer, and then it once again regrounds the answer in the data that it has in the LLM to give it more context and then give the answer back to the user. There's a lot of different ways that that orchestration can be done, and if you don't like the way that Copilot orchestrates, you can build your own custom experiences and build your own orchestrator. And so that's when you start to move into the custom agents and the custom copilots. All right, I think that helps sort of level set us. Patrick, do you want to go back in the Wayback Machine by April and talk about what Sympraxis's Copilot readiness strategy was?
Yeah, first clarification though. So orchestrator is not the new name of agents, right?
No, it's not.
Sorry, just had to throw that out there. Didn't mean to rub salt in the wound for all the renaming and not actually understanding what things are. So yes, we didn't want to spend too much time on this, but we did want to kind of touch base on Copilot readiness strategy. So we wanted to recap. We talked about a lot of this, as Julie mentioned, back in April in one of our Ask Some Praxises about this. So we just kind of wanted to start by talking about how to get ready, kind of a little bit of a higher level, things to think about. So like reviewing tenant site typology. Think about where your sensitive information is. Consider using sensitivity labels around that, making sure to check your permissions. You know, I mean, we are constantly talking about this with our clients around where your content should be stored, making sure the sensitive stuff is housed in the right locations, and that permissions are set up with regards to that. Investigate any of the links that are out there, you know, whether they're broken links or whether there has been access that's been sent out to guest users or things like that. Broken inheritance, double checking your sites and making sure that you're following your governance when it comes to permissioning. You know, for us, a lot of our communication sites are open to everyone but external users, whereas teams are more permissioned. You know, someone starts sharing stuff from a team in a way that shouldn't be, then someone's going to have access to something, including Copilot, that maybe they shouldn't. I actually will be talking about this in my session in DC. But also, in addition to that, you know, review your content validity to allow for accuracy. Make sure that your content owners are going in and updating what is there, making sure it's current, getting rid of old data. All of these things are key to making sure that Copilot is able to grab current information, make sure that the user is getting accurate stuff. And of course, orchestrate Copilot readiness portal. Orchestrate is a great way to run some of these reports, to check in on some of these things. So it makes it a little easier to view kind of the high scope of your environment in an easy way.
Awesome. Thanks for that summary. I wanted to answer a question in the chat specifically. The question was, will Claude be part of WorkIQ? I just wanted to say, so Claude equals Copilot in the sense that Claude is a product that gives you a user interface, an orchestrator, and an LLM. And so they have their own way to sort of productize that experience for people. The WorkIQ is sort of that marketing term that blankets that, but Copilot is that user interface plus orchestrator plus an LLM. Now the back end LLM here is ChatGPT 5. My understanding, and I don't want to my understanding is that you are now going to be able to change the LLM behind Copilot And that's just a general understanding I have. I don't know the details. I don't even know if I'm 100% right on that, but that was something we were reading and something we were hearing about. That feels a little dangerous. And the reason I want to say that is that what we were talking about is when you change the LLM model, the one thing about using Copilot is that your data stays in the sovereignty of the Microsoft 365 tenant. So that RAG pattern where you're taking the information from the graph, augmenting it with the question from the user and sending that over to the LLM, that's all happening within the boundaries of the Microsoft 365 tenant and its privacy. When you change the LLM, there was some fine print in something we read. Derek, maybe you remember this better than me, where basically you're leaving the security boundary of Microsoft 365. Do you remember more, or am I blowing smoke?
Yeah, that is something that you have when it's enabled in the tenant like at the tenant admin level. There's a checkbox that basically said this content is going outside the data boundary. That said, we saw something, and I believe it was one of the roadmap slides that said that it was getting added. So that's going to be that's going to change soon. But currently, right now, it goes outside of the boundary.
Okay. So I just wanted to clarify that. Yeah. Perfect. Awesome. Thank you for that. All right, let's get to Mark's section because he's got a lot of great information and we're going to run out of time. Take it away, Mark.
All right. So really, I didn't know about any of this. So this is one of the great things about Ask Sympraxis is we get to learn stuff so that we can tell you about it. Maybe that makes me an idiot for not understanding, but one of the things that I think you need to do for Copilot readiness is you need to sort of set Copilot up for yourself. You need to teach it about who you are and how you want to use it. I thought that was pretty revelatory when I found it. So one of the problems I think is that these settings are pretty well hidden. If you go to office.com, which we've all been sort of brainwashed to type to get to our stuff, we now land on the Microsoft 365 Copilot, whatever the hell this page is called. And the settings that I'm going to talk about are buried under the ellipses up in the upper right settings. And then we have custom instructions, work profile, saved memories, and chat history. So the things that are in there are actually really useful and make a big difference in how you experience Copilot, but you have to do a little bit of work to make it useful for yourself. Next slide, please.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to put a Copilot generated infographic into the slides, or else what kind of Copilot user am I? The two things I wanted to focus on are saved memories and custom instructions. They're a little bit different, and it took me a while to understand what the difference between the two are. Saved memories are things that Copilot learns as you're interacting with it. And if you phrase things a certain way, like remember that I'm an iconoclast, I would never say that. Then Copilot sort of says, "Oh, you're an iconoclast, so we want to sort of give you information back that way." Whereas custom instructions are, and I want you to use a formal tone, and I want you to do this, and I want you to do that. They're not learned. They're things that you choose to tell Copilot about who you are. And the two, if you think of, I think of a Venn diagram of these two, they feel like they overlap a lot, but when I show you a little bit more about how you manage them, you'll probably realize that they're a bit different. So saved memories are inferred from conversations you have with Copilot. It's adaptive and it evolves over time. It actually picks up on stuff as you're typing your prompts. It's something that you're sort of having a conversation with Copilot so that it learns more about you. Custom instructions are settings that you go in and can change over time, but they're more sort of fixed. They're not adaptive. They don't change through the course of using Copilot. Next slide, please. Okay, so custom instructions. I guess I did this in a different order. So these, when you go into those settings, you go to personalization, custom instructions. You can turn this on or off, which might be something you want to do if you don't want Copilot to think about you differently than the masses. I would think that you'd want this on, and that your organization would want to have it on. But what you can do is stuff like what you see on the right, and you see there's a little refresh icon way down at the bottom. It's sort of pre-canned things that if you click one of those options, like prioritize my manager, which feels really weird to click, but okay. It actually adds a prompt into that box that leads Copilot to act in that way. So you can see, I've selected several and put them in the box. Share clear and truthful feedback in a respectful tone and focus on offering constructive suggestions when something needs improvement. So this is almost like point and click prompt engineering. And these custom instructions are another augmentation that happens at time of your your individual prompts. It gets combined with these custom instructions to get a different tone or a different approach or a different something about who you are back. So it's interesting to keep hitting that refresh button, because you see a different set of options here. I don't know how many you can add. I don't know what the limits are here, but you also can just type into that box yourself if you choose to. So this gives you a lot of control over, how do you want Copilot to sort of behave while you're using it? Next slide, please. Saved memories. I've already seen a huge effect on this by adding a couple of saved memories. To me is an interesting phrase. It doesn't describe the thing that it seems to be to me. But when you tell Copilot things, it can remember what you say as these saved memories. So the two on the left, I've actually said to Copilot in my prompts, I said, remember that I like to question the status quo. Remember that I like to use metaphors to explain complex concepts. Those then get stored under the saved memories. And you can see each thing I've said is stored as a row there, and you can delete any one of them or delete all of them. So what you probably want to do is, over time, as you're interacting with Copilot, go in and check out what saved memories it's gleaned from your conversations. The phrasing does matter. So if you just say, question the status quo, it's not going to turn that into a saved memory. I don't know exactly how I fiddled with the phrasing a little bit. I like to question the status quo does turn into a saved memory. Remember that I like to question the status quo does too. It's almost like when you're talking to Copilot, not to have it go and get something, but to say, hey, Copilot, I'm like this, or I prefer that. And you'll also notice that it sort of converts what I've typed into a thing that makes sense to Copilot. I said, remember that I like to question the status quo. Copilot saved, user likes to question the status quo and values challenging conventional, I think that says wisdom there. So it decides what you mean and saves it. So that's why I think you need to just sort of keep an eye on this, because you want to make sure that it's acting as you actually want it to act. So between these two things, you actually start to see very big differences in how Copilot comes back to you. So for example, when I asked Copilot, what is the difference between saved memories and custom instructions, it said, would you like me to express this as a metaphor for you? It's like, I know why it asked me that, because I've said I like to use metaphors. And then it said, would you like me to create an infographic that uses this metaphor? It created an infographic for me. And it said, would you like me to do it again, but with a different metaphor? So it's clearly paying a lot of attention to the way I feel like I want it to provide information to me. With just a few little tweaks. To me, that I'm not a gaga person about Copilot, but this is starting to feel like I'm getting some control over how it works and what kinds of things I get back. Maybe I'll start to drink the Kool-Aid because of some of these settings. So I think it's important to understand these.
Awesome.
And I think it's time that we spike Mark's Kool-Aid, maybe.
Spike it with club soda, please.
Yes, exactly. All right. We have a bunch of resources. These are clickable. They'll also be available on the website. We're hitting just 1 o'clock. There is a question here that I am not 100% sure about the answer, so I'm going to say that out loud. Is this available for users without the M365 Copilot license? I seem to recall that the Edge Copilot, that's the consumer version of Copilot in the browser, did get enabled memory, but it's not like what Mark is showing. That is definitely for a licensed Copilot user. But I don't know that memory, if there's any memory at all in the consumer version. I think there was when I tested it last time, but I'm not 100% sure. So if somebody knows, maybe put it in the chat if they know more answers. All right. Up next, January 21st, we're going to try SharePoint navigation, global hub, and site strategies that work. We've done a little bit of navigation here and there before in episodes of Ask Sympraxis, but we're going to see what's new. There has been a lot of changes. We're going to sort of bring it back, bring it fresh. The last time we did navigation was in 2021, so there's been a lot of changes and a lot of ways we think about it differently. So absolutely join us on January 21st. In the meantime, see us live. Patrick is going to Microsoft 365 Community Days DC. Congratulations, Patrick. We're very proud of you getting into that conference and starting your journey on the speaker train. Microsoft 365 Miami, Julie, Mark and Mark will be there. Mark and the Funky Bunch will be in Miami. Microsoft 365 Community Conference, that's in April in Orlando. That's school vacation week, people. That'll be fun. Join us there. We've got most of the contingent. Everyone but Patrick and Todd will be there. And then the European Collaboration Summit, which is in Cologne, Germany this year. Everybody but Todd and Carrie will be there. So we've got a lot of showing up in the community. We hope to see you out and about. And until next time, thank you everybody for joining us. We really appreciate it. Love the commentary in the chat. Keep it coming. Join us next time.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask Sympraxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues.